In The Hobbit, Gollum stands out as one of the most interesting characters in the book for several reasons. His ungainly appearance with large lamp-like eyes, his psychopathic tendencies to kill goblins, his love for riddles, and his subterranean lair where he broods and murders with the One Ring. But despite all these great character elements, what really makes Gollum stand out is the way he speaks. Always in the third person, never directly addressing Bilbo or using the word you, instead preferring to have the conversation with himself, as he is so unaccustomed to talking with others from his long solitude under the misty mountains, and referring to others in passing as he does so. The lisping and haunted speech with his random outbursts and whine, the way he pivots from one point to the next in a single sentence, and the unique spin on the language with random pluralizations and self-referential titles. Gollum truly stands apart from many characters, and is what makes him so interesting as a character and so memorable to us as the reader. It's also why so many people loved Andy Serkis's portrayal of the character in the films where he featured, as he truly captured and mastered Gollum's way of speaking. The way a character speaks can tell us a lot about them, and make them really stick in the mind of our reader. They can help turn a mundane conversation into something interesting, quirky, or character-defining, so that even if the content isn't the most enthralling, the way the character says it is. It could be the stern but poetic nature of Professor McGonagall.
As I recall, he has a particular proclivity for pyrotechnics.
Or the mysterious but wise sentences formed by Albus Dumbledore as he almost half talks to himself.
But you know, happiness can be found even in the darkest of times.
Or the polite and fervorous tone of Bilbo as he sways between courteous and frustrated.
Put that back. Put that back. Not the jam. Excuse me. A tad excessive, isn't it? You got a cheese knife?
Or maybe the simple and direct words of Maximus.
I will have my vengeance, in this life or the next.
Or how about the idiom and profanity-laden speech of Billy Butcher?
See, when they're apart, they're absolute fucking rubbish. But you put them together, they're the goddamn fucking Spice Girls.
Or even the authoritative and strong-willed power of Princess Leia.
I should have expected to find you holding Vader's leash. I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
Or so many other characters that have clear and defined ways of speaking. Having your characters speak in unique and different ways is important for two clear reasons. Firstly, it allows them to be more realised as independent actors in your story, and helps with the showing rather than the telling of who they are, where they're from, and what their background is. Gollum's speech patterns show us so much about him as a character and where he's come from, that he is lonely, talks to himself, but also from a somewhat civilized background, as he can play word games and infer subtle meanings from others. Contrast this with the overly polite Bilbo, where we learn quickly that he is not one who is comfortable with using his words in confrontation, and clearly has lived a sheltered life up to this point at least. The difference between the two is stark, and their speech patterns are the key reason for showing us this. They are communicating differently, and that sets up a very interesting dialogue between them. More than that, speech patterns help us define regional variation, as different areas use the same language but in different ways. We can see that Fleur from Harry Potter is French because of the way her speech is written, with the natural patterns of her French ancestry coming across in the way she speaks English. Contrast this with Lucius Malfoy, whose typically English and aristocratic tone tells us something about his background too. All of this makes our world feel richer, deeper, and more realistically populated. After all, a woman from Yorkshire and a woman from Cornwall speak very differently, use different words, grammatical structures, idioms and expressions, and showing this and reflecting it in our story can give our characters greater depth. The second reason it's important to pay attention to your speech patterns is that unless you are co-writing your book, all the characters will be written by you, and it can be very tempting, or just by accident, to write them in your voice only. That is, in the way that you speak. If you want to create a truly engrossing book, you need to make sure that all your characters don't speak like you. Tolkien speaks quite like Bilbo, but he sounds nothing like Gollum. If you write everything using your voice, the story will become very stale to read, no matter how interesting the plot might be. Try to find new voices to express things outside your norm. Variety is the spice of life, after all, in giving your reader some characters who speak plainly, like Harry, some intellectually, like Hermione, some mysteriously, like Dumbledore, and some sternly, like McGonagall, will make sure to showcase your talent as a writer. Make memorable characters, and give much-needed variety to your story, so that your reader can never quite predict how each character will talk or how an interaction between the characters will play out. A great way to find more voices to write is to watch interviews. Long-form interviews are preferable as they give you a larger sample size, but as you do this, listen. Make notes on the way that certain individuals speak. Do they have key phrases that they repeat? Do they respond in certain ways, for example with short, clear answers or repetition of the question they've been asked? Do they use phrases or analogies to answer, or do they prefer plain, direct answers? Watching for these little habits and tics is a great way to mould a character. I recently watched an interview between Gary Neville and Roy Keane talking about football and found it very interesting to see how they interacted. How Roy has many phrases that he repeated and often answered directly, and Gary always asked questions in the same way with smart follow-ups, but gave analogous answers when asked questions in return. These resources are very useful if you're looking to develop speech patterns in your own characters. It's important to remember, however, that these are more quirks of a character and you shouldn't go overboard with them. Adding a few extra S's to Gollum's speech doesn't make it hard to read The Hobbit, but as you replace every the with t, as is common in Yorkshire, it can become tricky. The way we speak is one element of who we are, and yes, we have catchphrases that some people recognize as ours, but be careful that the novelty of introducing a speech pattern doesn't overshadow the content of the conversation. Try to find a balance that adds flavor to your characters, lets them express some personality and show a little more detail, but all the while keeping the book legible and clear. There are many ways to write speech patterns, but having a character who only uses words beginning with V will make it very hard for your reader and even harder for you.
The only verdict is vengeance, a vendetta, held as a votive not in vain, for the value and veracity of such shall one day vindicate the vigilant and the virtuous. Verily, this vichyssoise of verbiage veers most verbose, so let me simply add that it's my very good honor to meet you, and you may call me V.